There is a locomotive engineer sitting in a cab right now somewhere in Nebraska who has been riding the same seat for the past 11 hours. His lower back has been screaming at him for the last 6 of those hours. When he finally climbs down from that engine tonight, he will walk like a man 30 years older than he actually is, because every single vertebra in his spine has been jackhammered by vibration since before the sun came up this morning. The seat he has been sitting in was designed sometime in the 1970s and installed in a locomotive that rolled off the assembly line before most of his co-workers were even born. Federal studies have documented for more than 4 decades that these seats are systematically destroying the spines of the men who sit in them day after day and year after year. And still, nobody at the railroad has done a single thing to replace them, because replacing seats costs money, and broken backs are somebody else's problem to deal with down the road. The Association of American Railroads conducted a study back in 1980 where they surveyed almost 1,300 cab crew members across 14 different railroads about the seats they were sitting in every single shift. What they found was that 40% of those workers reported back pain from riding in those seats, and another 25% reported neck pain that they attributed directly to the conditions inside the locomotive cab. That was 1980. The seats that are installed in the majority of locomotives running freight across America right now are either those exact same seats that were there 45 years ago, or seats based on those exact same outdated designs, because most locomotives in service today were built before that study was even published, and the railroads never saw fit to upgrade them. The Federal Railroad Administration put out a report in 1998 called Human Factors Guidelines for Locomotive Cabs, and it said the lack of appropriate seating in the cab environment was one of the most thoroughly documented problems in the entire industry. Engineers were complaining about lower back pain, neck pain, and shoulder pain, and the report said it was happening because there was a mismatch between what the human body needed and what the seat was actually providing. That report came out more than 25 years ago, and you can still find engineers sitting in the same inadequate seats today. The scientific term for what happens to these men over the course of their careers is whole body vibration. It describes the shocks and jolts, the lateral sway, and the vertical bouncing that are transmitted into the body through your backside when you sit in a locomotive cab for a 12-hour shift. Researchers who study this phenomenon have found that locomotive engineers are twice as likely to experience frequent low back pain and neck pain compared to workers who do similar sedentary jobs without the vibration exposure. The prevalence of serious neck and lower back disorders among locomotive engineers is nearly double what you would find in a control group of office workers, and the connection between sitting in vibrating vehicles and developing chronic spinal problems has been understood for more than 50 years. The railroads know all of this information and have known it for decades. When they hire new employees, they often require back x-rays as part of the entrance physical examination. They do this specifically so they have a baseline record of what your spine looked like before you started working for them. That shows how confident they are that the job will damage your back over time. They want documentation showing you came in healthy, so they can later argue that whatever is wrong with your spine was pre-existing or happened somewhere else entirely. The engineers are only part of the story, because conductors, brakemen, and trackmen are being destroyed just as thoroughly by completely different mechanisms. These mechanisms attack the spine from different angles, yet they produce the same devastating results. A conductor walking a train in a rail yard might cover miles in a single shift, sometimes 3 or 4 miles before the day is done. Every single step happens on loose ballast rock that shifts and rolls under your feet with every movement you make. Your ankles are constantly adjusting, Your knees constantly absorb the impact from the uneven surface. Your lower back constantly compensates for the instability beneath you in ways your body was never designed to do for hours at a time. Track workers handle equipment that weighs anywhere from 20 to 60 pounds. Items like spikes, tie plates, joint bars, and hydraulic tools. They do this while standing on that same unstable ballast, bending and twisting and pulling in positions that put enormous strain on the spine over and over again until the discs start to give way. Back injuries became so common among railroad workers at one point in history that the medical profession actually named a condition after them, which tells you something about how widespread and how recognized this problem really was even 100 years ago. Railway spine was a diagnosis doctors gave to railroad workers who came in with chronic back pain and symptoms that seemed to have no other explanation. Their bodies had been worn down by years of bending, stretching, pulling, pushing, lifting, sitting in vibrating seats, and walking on unstable surfaces day after day until the cumulative damage became impossible to ignore. The name has fallen out of common medical usage, but the condition certainly has not disappeared from the yards, the engines, and the track gangs. Men are still breaking down in exactly the same ways their grandfathers did. What makes all of this so frustrating is that solutions exist and have existed for years. Air ride suspension seats that absorb vibration are available and have been available for a long time. Proper ergonomic designs that support the lower back and allow for adjustment are not some kind of exotic technology. Other industries that expose workers to whole body vibration have adopted equipment standards that significantly reduce the damage. The railroads could do the same thing if they wanted to, but a report from the American Society of Mechanical Engineers in 2003 found that executives focused on the bottom line were making decisions about equipment, while the crews who actually had to use that equipment had little say in the process. There was simply no incentive for the companies to tackle the vibration problem when the costs of broken backs were being borne by the workers rather than the shareholders. The lawsuits tell you everything you need to know about how serious this problem really is and how much damage is being done to the men who work these jobs year after year. Verdicts and settlements for railroad workers with back injuries routinely run into the millions of dollars. One Indiana conductor recently won a $15 million jury award for a lumbar spine injury that ended his career and left him with chronic pain that will follow him for the rest of his life. Other cases resulted in $3 million in settlements for engineers with back injuries, nearly $3 million for conductors whose spines gave out, and $1 million for workers whose backs failed while using defective equipment that the railroad knew was defective and refused to replace. The railroads are paying out enormous sums to workers whose spines have been destroyed by conditions they were forced to endure every day. Yet they still have not fixed the underlying problems, apparently because it is cheaper to pay lawsuits after the fact than to replace seats and equipment before the damage is done. There is a locomotive somewhere in Nebraska right now with a seat that was installed 40 years ago, and an engineer who is trying to make it through the last few hours of his shift without the pain in his lower back getting any worse than it already is. Somewhere behind him, there is a conductor who has already walked 3 miles on ballast today, and whose knees and hips and spine are all reminding him that this job was never designed with the human body in mind. By the time they retire, if they make it that long, their spines will look like they belong to someone 2 decades older than they actually are. The railroad will tell them that they followed all the rules and provided all the training, and that whatever happened to their backs is not the company's responsibility. Somewhere in a filing cabinet there will be x-rays from 20 years earlier showing what their spines looked like on the day they were hired, back when they still worked the way spines are supposed to work.